Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and today we are going to take a look at the HiFiMan EF600 DAC headphone amplifier and headphone stand all in one unit. So the EF600 DAC amp. This was sent to me for review directly from HiFiMan. They have asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation of this product, and they have made no attempt to influence my opinion on this piece or any other that they have sent me. So all of the thoughts you are about to hear are mine and mine alone. This unit is available for $799 US from a number of retailers. A few of them I am an affiliate link member with. So some of the links that you will see down below to buy this product will be from retailers for which I have an affiliate link with, and those links that are affiliate links will be labeled as such. If you like what I say about this product, please consider using the link, one of those affiliate links, to buy this thing, and I will get a few bucks back, and that just helps me keep running the channel so that I can continue to bring you cool stuff like this. So we will go ahead and do shameless self-promotion, then we'll come back on the other side and talk more about the HiFiMan EF600 DAC amp.
Hi, I'm Wave Theory's human companion, and he wants you to know that your support of this YouTube channel helps keep the reviews coming. If you enjoy Wave Theory's honest, thorough style, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and check out the links in the description below to sign up for the Patreon or send him a tip through PayPal. All right, enjoy the musings.
This is going to be another review where I don't hold this thing up the whole time because it's got some heft to it and it's a little bit awkward, so I don't just want to sit here and hold it. So in a little bit, we'll cut to a little bit different view where I show you a close-up of the front panel, the back panel, the overall build of this thing, and so forth. So that is coming in just a moment. So what does your $800 US get you with this unit? So this is a DAC amp combo unit. So in here we have what HiFiMan calls their Himalaya R2R Pro DAC module. What is that? So what that is basically it's an R2R, a resistor ladder DAC on a chip. It is similar in nature in that way to Schitt's multi-bit approach, where it is a small resistor ladder on a chip. This one, I believe the DAC module in here, there are actually two resistor ladders on two separate chips because it is balanced. That may not be quite accurate, but that is my understanding. Okay, then you also get an amplifier in here, and the amplifier in here is rated at just over 5 watts per channel into a 32 ohm output from the balanced headphone amplifier output. So that is a fair amount of power. There's also several different digital inputs, and there are both analog inputs and outputs, which I will explain more when we get to the unit tour here in just a moment. All right, what can this thing decode? So the Himalaya R2R DAC module in this thing, at least checking with Ottervana, because Ottervana is pretty good. Like when you connect this thing USB, Ottervana does a pretty good job of telling you what a DAC can decode. And you're basically limited to PCM files, and they top out at 24-bit 192 kilohertz sampling rates. So not the widest range of things that can decode, but 24-bit 192 kilohertz PCM covers most of the bases. Now, if you have an extensive SACD or DSD collection, this may not be the route you want to go. Okay, if you need MQA, again, this may not be the route you want to go, but that's what's in there as far as its decoding abilities. All right, so just real quick, a little bit of a narrative on this. This is the slightly upgraded version, or the slightly higher end model, I should say, in HiFiMan's amp DAC line. The entry-level unit was their EF400, which I did a review of back in the summer of 2022, and it's early fall, if you will, late summer, early fall 2023 as I filmed this. All right, and so this one slotted in just like a few $100s more than the EF400. The EF400 initially released at $600 and is now mostly $500 from what I can tell. And then this one comes in right at $800, offers some of those improvements that I just mentioned in terms of inputs and outputs, and just has this weird like headphone stand shape to it. And so I really liked the EF400 for what it was. I thought it was a really solid all-in-one unit there at what was $600, and then at $500 becomes an even better value. So I was excited to get this one in and to see how it stacked up and how it compared to that EF400. So that is another thing that we will get to throughout the course of this review. So a lot to talk about with this one. I will timestamp this out so you can jump around and watch the stuff of most interest to you. So with that, let's cut to that unit tour video. Here is the front panel, and it's fairly straightforward. I mean, we have the vertical form factor here. We've got 4-pin XLR balanced headphone output, 1/4 inch / 6.35 millimeter single-ended headphone output. The potentiometer here is attached to this rectangular volume knob, and I like this volume knob a lot better than the EF400s. Like the EF400, this was round and it was just very splashy, and I also did not notice any channel imbalance at low volumes here. So just the shape of this thing and all of that, it just, you know, gives you a pretty clear indicator just at a glance of like how loud this thing is at any given moment. And it feels a lot nicer, a lot more like not tight, just a lot smoother, less splashy, more responsive, that kind of thing than the EF400 did. Then we have 2 buttons here that cycle through a list of options on either side. We see here high gain NOS for non-oversampling. We have high gain oversampling, low gain oversampling, and low gain non-oversampling. And this button cycles through those from top to bottom, and then you get to the bottom and it jumps back up to the top. All right, and then over here we have the cycles for the various inputs we have. We've got 3 flavors of digital input, and then we have analog inputs too. I'll show you the back panel in just a moment. But we've got indicator lights along here, and then we cycle through these with this button right there. Okay, so USB/coax is both on this little LED indicator. When it's on green, it's USB. When it's white, it's coax. Just how it works, okay? Then you get Bluetooth, which this little LED very thoughtfully glows blue. Okay, and then we have indicators for the RCA analog input and the balanced analog input, which I will show in a moment. Then this little thing down here is we have the little, advertisement little deal badge for the Himalaya R2R Pro DAC module that is in this thing. So look at the side panel here. It's got this kind of tapered shape going on. With it, like this is like a kind of a cheap-ish aluminum. I think this is plastic. Okay, and honestly, when I first got it in and was looking at it, I was like, you know what, this thing is kind of goofy looking, and for whatever reason, even though it's not the right color and not quite the right shape, it reminded me of the old analog metronome that my mom had. She's a pianist, and so like when I was a really little kid, she'd be practicing the piano, and there would be this metronome shaped kind of like this thing that would just go tick, 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 tick back and forth. And I don't know why this thing reminds me of that so much. It just does. Okay, in terms of the aesthetic. Okay, all right, but anyway, that's what it looks like, and it has this shape. I'm sure the secret is out now why it has this shape, and that is because the idea is you take a headphone and you stick it over top of this thing, and bam, it's a headphone stand. Okay, like that. Yes, this is the Aria Organic. Yes, a review is in the works. Stay tuned. Okay, all right, so how about I show you the back panel? No, sorry, I'm not going to steal that one. All right, here it is, a back panel. Power input here, master power switch. There's no power switch on the front, so just master on off here. There really is no reason you need to turn it off. It's probably beneficial to leave it on because of the R2R DAC module in there. It does get warm-ish as it runs and is used, but it never really gets hot. Okay, so there is that. It's probably fine to leave this on all the time. So we see a pretty full complement of inputs and outputs here. So let's look at them. Here, these two lower ones, we have a XLR, a 3-pin, a balanced analog output, and we have an RCA, a single-ended analog output. These are line outs. There's no preamp feature here, but these are just direct line outs from the R2R DAC module in this thing. Then above those, we have a matching pair of inputs, single-ended and 3-pin XLR balanced. Okay, I like the addition particularly of the single-ended because I thought one thing that the EF400 was missing was a way to connect a turntable. And so you can connect your turntable's preamp output right into this thing. This thing does not have a built-in turntable preamp, but you can plug your outboard turntable preamp right in there. Works great. Okay. Okay, pretty solid single-ended input there. And then if you want to use the internal amp in here and bypass the DAC with a outboard balanced DAC, you can plug in right there. Then we have the digital inputs. We actually have two USB connectors right here. This is a single USB input that you have to choose either the type B input or the type C input. So again, these are not two USB inputs. It's one input that you have to make a decision which connector you want to use. Then we have an RCA coax SPDIF input, and then here we have the Bluetooth antenna. All right, that's the build of the unit, or inputs, outputs, and all of that. We do see that we have some ventilation here. We've got air intake here at the bottom, and then we do have a matching at the top, okay, outflow. All right, so it was a smart move because heat rises, bring cool air in from the bottom and let it out the top. So that is well done. Okay, and it's fairly heavy. Like, the reason I'm doing this view is because this thing has got some heft to it, and I didn't want to hold it up in front of the camera the whole time. But even though it was kind of goofy looking and reminded me of an old analog metronome for reasons I still don't fully understand, it just does. After a while, it grew on me, and I did appreciate having a headphone stand on my desk like that, and one that honestly is a little warm. Okay. Because you take the headphones off there, put them on your head, and you're like, oh, that's pleasantly toasty. Not hot, just pleasantly toasty. Nice little thing to include here. I mean, it's summer where I am, but in the winter, that might be nice. Okay? All right, but, and then I think the potentiometer here, definitely an upgrade. So much less splashy, feels a lot better to use than the old EF400 did. Okay, but there's the unit tour, inputs, outputs, all of that sort of thing. Back to my face on camera. All right, now that we are back, let's think about sound here, and let's talk about the testing gear, the test setups that I used. So because this is an all-in-one unit, I did spend a fair amount of time using it as a DAC amp, just listening to it in that way, because clearly that is the primary intent of this device, is to be a DAC amp. So I used it mostly that way. Sourcing it from two different digital sources mostly. I connected the coaxial input on this through my Singer SU6 DDC, which was in turn fed by my Sonor Ultra Rendu network audio streamer. I have reviewed both the SU6 and the Ultra Rendu recently, so I will put links to those reviews in the description down below. Then I also use direct USB connection into my Microsoft Surface Pro 4 to do other forms of testing and to do just some general listening in there too. All right, when this thing was connected to the Ultra Rendu and SU6 combo, the Ultra Rendu is used as a Rune endpoint, so I would use Rune there, and then when it was connected to my Surface Pro 4, that was using Ottervana there. And in both cases, I used lossless FLAC or high-res FLAC files, or I used local DSD files, or I streamed lossless or high-res FLAC files from Qobuz. A variety of headphones were used to plug into here, including Focal Radiance, Focal Utopia, the original version. Let's see, what else made it in here? HiFiMan HE1000 SE, HiFiMan Aria Organic, HiFiMan Susvara, HiFiMan HE6 SEV2. So a lot of HiFiMan in there for planars and all of that, and then a couple of the dynamics with the focals, and I'm sure there were others in there. I'm just not remembering what they are at the moment. All right, and then I also did some checking of like how good is the DAC on this, and so like I connected the DAC output to my Lake People G111 Mark II amplifier here and there. And I should say at this point that like the analog output is only line out, it's not preamp. So if that matters to you, be aware of that. You'll need to find some way to control volume on your desktop speakers or whatever it is that you have the analog outputs connected to. Okay, anyway, Lake People G111 Mark II there, and then I also used a bunch of different DACs to try to determine the DAC quality of this thing. So the Matrix Mini i4 DAC and streamer is in for review. I tried that output into the that XLR output of that into this, and then also did likewise with the Schiit Modius, the original, and the Schiit Bifrost 2/64. Okay, again, using the balanced outputs of those into the balanced output of this. And then briefly checked the quality of the single-ended input on this thing using, also in for review, the FX Audio, or excuse me, I got that backwards, the Black Ice Audio FX DAC that is the DSD and Wi-Fi version. That's also in for review. Okay, that's a lot. How does it sound? Pretty good overall, right? And I think it's worth at this point going back and just mentioning that I have that EF400 review out there, and I was pretty blown away by the EF400 when I heard it, because it had just a really fun, unique, engaging sound, and also just at its price point was one of the best all-in-one units that I had heard up until that point. And so this one shares some similar qualities to the EF400, but it also stands on its own and has its own presentation and sonic quirks, which we're going to unpack here in a little bit. But I do want to say that I probably would have been similarly enthused with this one as I was with the EF400 had I heard this one first. They are similar enough, and the EF400 like set a standard earlier than this one where I just wasn't quite as blown away by this one. But again, I want to throw out there that I likely would have been had I heard it first. Why do I say all of this? Okay. What you get here is a mostly neutral perceived frequency response. There is pretty even tonality and tonal balance through the entire frequency range. Good extension both directions. A nice, deep, extended, well-presented bass with a lot of rumble and some fun dynamics and impact in the low end. The mid-range, for the most part, one small caveat to this, for the most part, again, has a nice and natural tonality and natural balance to it. Likewise with the treble, and all three of the major frequency response categories, bass, mid-range, treble, sound like they're pretty well balanced with each other in a fairly natural way. Now, the one area where I want to modify that a little bit is there is, to my ear, just a little bit more mid-range energy here, up around, you know, that the ear gain region, kind of like that 1 to 3 kilohertz region right in there. It does sound a little bit more forward, just slightly more forward than neutral to my ears. If you are familiar with my channel, you know that I don't really like mid-forward presentations. I don't like shoutiness. I don't like honkiness or anything like that. This is a little bit mid-forward, but it doesn't quite go shouty or honky most of the time. It does push some headphones that are prone to sounding shouty or honky into, excuse me, into that range a little bit quicker than some other source gear that I have heard, but still not enough to be overly objectionable or a deal breaker for me. So from a perceived frequency response and tonality standpoint, mostly neutral, hint of mid-range forwardness. Okay, presentational aspects on this though, like that fun, lively, energetic sound that came from the EF400 made it in here too. Okay, it is a fun, engaging, active, lively presentation going on with this that just can really pull you right in. It's not fatiguing and all of that, and you just can listen to it and enjoy it for a long time. Just the way it's done, it just strikes an excellent balance there of being fun and engaging but not over the top. So that also means that there's a fair amount of like dynamics to this thing, like snare drums and all of that have a nice healthy snap to them. Everything is just, it's fun, it's active, it's energetic, it's engaging. Okay, from there we have a few things to talk about because there is not world-beating resolution here. If you are big into the fine details, they are here, but it's a little bit smoothed over, I want to say. Like, not horribly so, but don't expect like a lot of rich texturing. Don't expect like to hear room reverbs and ghost notes. You'll hear them, but they aren't going to be like in your face or forward or like super noticeable. There's just, it's got decent resolution to it, but it's not outstanding. It does have enough resolution though, that to the extent that this category overlaps with resolution, which I think is a fair amount, but it's not all there is to it, would be the spatial presentation. The soundstage here is pretty big, so if you're a fan of large sound stages, this is a good piece for you to look at. It also is fairly holographic within that soundstage, and it's got a good sense of depth for something at this price point. But images and all of that are placed pretty well. It does not have great separation. It has okay spatial separation to it, and I think that's where the resolution that I was just talking about, which is again okay but not great, okay, hurts the spatial presentation a little bit, is because particularly with spatial separation, I find that it's really hard to do that for a piece that is also not super resolving. I think resolution really helps with that, and so this one is good at the positive aspects of the spatial presentation, the imaging, but not necessarily good at the negative, just meaning where are things not. Okay, so it's a good job of here it is, but not great at like here it isn't kind of a thing, if that matters to you. But the depth dimension is pretty solid for the price and for what it is. That part really impressed me with the spatial presentation here too. All right, so I think like on its own, that's a pretty good description. I guess the only thing I didn't really talk about is the timbre. The timbre, again, is fairly strong. It does a good job with the timing aspects of timbre, like attacks and decays and that sort of thing. And then I mentioned the tonality, which is the other big part of timbre there earlier. So voices sound fairly much like voices, pianos like pianos, guitars like guitars, things of that nature. Does a reasonably good job with that. Okay. Now with that said, let's talk about some comparisons, and that will also help us start to tease out like how much is the DAC section of this worth? How much of the $800 went into building the amplifier and that sort of thing? And so we will start with the comparison of this to its sibling model, the EF400, which I will do from a little bit different vantage point. So let's take a look at that, and then we'll come back and look at other comparisons. Let's compare these siblings here. EF400, which was $600 when it was first released, is now basically hanging out at $500. And of course, you've got the 800 over here. Okay, when I reviewed the EF400 back in, I believe it was late July of 2022, it is now early September 2023 as I film this. I said I really liked this unit. There were a couple of build quirks about it, like these knobs here, particularly the volume knob here on the right, just feels kind of splashy, and there's channel imbalance in its potentiometer when it's in lower volume, and you got to get up to about 8:30, 9 o'clock before that knocks it off. Okay, I just thought that there were a few corners cut build-wise and all of that to reach the price point, and it was mostly about the performance with this piece there. And I said one thing in particular that I really wish this had would have been an analog input so that you can access its quite capable headphone amp for an analog source like a turntable or all that. Again, there's only a USB input on this. So the input-output configuration on the EF600 is much more complete. You get an SPDIF input in addition to the USB in, and you get a full complement of both balanced and single-ended analog inputs and outputs, okay, on this thing, where you only have analog outputs on this, no analog input over here. Okay, this one over here does have the 4.4 millimeter Penticon output and a 3.5 millimeter single-ended headphone output. Who cares, honestly? I had never really understood quite the draw to having all of those on there. I mean, it saves you from having to buy an adapter, but these are really the two that you need, in my opinion. Okay, put those on there, and we're good. So then, other than that, like features-wise, this one just has the Himalaya R2R module in it. This has the Himalaya R2R Pro. And I want to say that the difference in power output ultimately is like there's 4.4 watts per channel here and 5.1 watts per channel output here, at least in terms of HiFiMan's specification. But otherwise, like, you can kind of see the family resemblance in terms of the aesthetic and all of that. So I do think the EF600 makes some ergonomic and connectivity additions to the EF400 that are welcome, and I think that the potentiometer used in here is an upgrade over that in the EF400 as well. So I think those are appropriate for the increase in price, like to have those added options and just overall improved quality. Now, how about the sound? The EF600, yes, I think is better slightly. Okay, why do I say that? They have a little bit different sound signature in comparison to each other. This one, the EF400, is a little bit more warm, dark in its perceived frequency response presentation. It doesn't have quite the sparkle, quite the mid-range presence, and all of that that the EF600 does. They both are very robust in their low end. They reach down deep, they rumble pretty hard. They also have a lot of dynamics and impact in their low end, so they hit pretty hard too. It's just that I think there's a little bit more mid-range and treble energy, so both mid-range and treble coming out of the EF600 than there is from the EF400 in comparison. So this one is probably a little bit closer to neutral, maybe a hint of mid-forwardness in there, but not enough to be objectionable even to my mid-forward sensitive ears, okay, than this one, where this is just a little bit more warm, dark in comparison. They both have that fun, engaging sound from the Himalaya R2R DAC modules. That was present here, made it into the EF600. There's a liveliness and an energetic nature to the presentation of that R2R DAC module in there. They both have that. I think the EF600 is just a smidge more resolving, a little bit bigger in soundstage. And again, soundstage size is not a question of better or worse. It's just a presentational and preference thing. But where this one is a little bit improved over the EF400 is that the spatial presentation is a little bit more holographic and coherent from the EF600 than it is from the EF400. Now, I used 3 different headphones from the balanced outputs on these to do this comparison. One was the Focal Radiance, the other one was HiFiMan's HE6 SEV2. Both of these have plenty of power to push that notoriously hard to drive headphone, so you're good there. And then I also used this one that's sitting right here, the Aria Organic, okay, to do this comparison. And I thought that the biggest difference between the two actually came out on the Radiance. And then it was a little bit more with the HE6 SEV2, and then the Aria Organic I thought was the closest gap between these two. And I don't think that's because the Aria Organic and all that lacks resolution or whatnot. I just think that however these things are designed, they do seem to prefer pushing planar loads, maybe. Okay, just a little bit, because the dynamics that I plugged into these things, like the Radiance, the TH900, like those kinds of things, they were good, but I wasn't really super sold on them. But I think planars just sound better from these two, honestly. So I would push you in that direction if you pick up one of these amps. Again, some dynamics are probably fine, just the ones that I have access to, I preferred the sound of planars. Okay, and then because the Aria Organic is relatively easy to drive, I think that brought the gap down in quality, the perceived quality gap down a little bit between these two. But on all three of those headphones, I could tell that the EF600 was a little bit more resolving, a little bit more complete and coherent in its spatial presentation. It's staged a little bit bigger. But both of these had a little bit of, you know, they had that fun, engaging Himalaya R2R sound, and they just have very capable amplifiers in them that exhibit a lot of control even over very difficult loads. All right, so between these two, I do think that the EF600 does earn its added price tag over the EF400 by being a little bit better in overall performance. Not a huge gap, but a little bit better. But then also being a lot more ergonomically complete, having a much more complete feature set that allows it to fit into more systems for more people, I think. So those are things to consider. There's my comparison of these two. Let's talk comparison of the EF600 with some other products. Let's talk about just the DAC section comparison here a little bit, and let's start with the original shit Modius right here. And how this stacks up, the DAC in here stacks up to the DAC in the EF600. Kind of depends on your system configuration and how you have this thing plugged in. If you're just using either like a standard 5-volt wall wart power supply, like what charges a cell phone or something like this in here, or just the USB power on this, I'm going to say that this and the EF600 DAC are pretty even. Slight presentational differences. I found that the EF600 consistently had more low-end presence and oomph to it, a little bit more rumble, a little bit more dynamics, and all of that. But I thought that the the Modius was just slightly more resolving and laterally holographic, though it didn't quite have the depth dimension that the DAC in the EF600 was able to bring. Now, the thing with the The thing with the Modius that can really give it an advantage over the DAC in the EF600 is if you clean up the power supply on this and you give it a really quality SPDIF input. Like when I connected this to a small green computer linear power supply, and then I also used the chain of the Ultra Rendu through the SU6, and then connected that via SPDIF into this, and then also SPDIF into this, because the SU6 has twin coax output, so I can use the coax here and the coax on the EF600 and compare pretty quickly there. Then the Modius can really pull ahead. It becomes a lot cleaner, lower sonic background, and again, it starts to bring out more of that depth dimension. It's more resolving in its spatial. It's more resolving and it's more holographic in its spatial presentation generally, and all of that. So it can really outperform the DAC in there, but again, you've got to give it a linear power supply to do that and get around its USB input. But more like for like of USB to USB, using the USB power on this one, I think they're pretty much dead even. Okay, moving up to the Bifrost 2/64 though, this is just clearly an upgrade over the built-in DAC on the EF600. You get more resolution, more spatial holography, an even bigger soundstage yet, okay, a more natural timbre and all of that. The one thing that I will say that the DAC in the EF600 continues to do more so than the shits is that it It still has that active, lively presentation to it with lots of dynamics and lots of low-end oomph and rumble and slam and that sort of thing. So if you like that kind of presentation, the EF600 has that consistently, a little bit more than these two do, although these two are not slouches in that regard because those are also aspects that are hallmarks of the shit house sound. Okay, so what can we conclude then about the DAC section of the EF600 based on that? And I think that you're getting roughly a slightly above entry-level balanced DAC in the EF600. It would be maybe around a $200, $250 kind of piece if you pulled that DAC out with these input-output configurations and just built a DAC off of that, a standalone DAC. It would be roughly right around what the Modius, I think, is, both in terms of price and performance, provided you don't go nuts and give this an LPS and like all of that kind of stuff to go with it. So that helps us place the value of the DAC in here. And really, for an $800 all-in-one, I'm going to say that that's not too bad, okay? So that, to me, is kind of the takeaway on the DAC section. And that is both, like, you know, the DAC in the EF600, again, is really what gives it that lively, energetic sound, because when I used the analog outputs of this, just the DAC line out, like, I still heard that active, fun, energetic sound coming out of other amps, like the G111 Mark II, which I'll show you in a moment, okay? Yeah, it's right over here. I'll show it to you in a moment, okay? So, like, that sound comes from the DAC. So that's where a lot of the fun and the uniqueness of the sound of this comes from. And it's a sound that I don't hear elsewhere other than maybe the EF400, other than those tonality differences that I mentioned in that comparison. Okay, but that's where it comes from. But then it's also to the detriment because, and we'll get to this about the amp in just a moment, I do think that the DAC performance, particularly with that kind of meh resolution, is the bottleneck in the performance of this unit. So pros and cons there. It's where the fun, energetic, lively nature comes from, but also just lowers its performance ceiling, generally speaking, of the unit overall. Let's talk about the amplifier in here and to get further unpack why I say that. So again, I still have a bunch of wires on this thing, so forgive me for a moment. Come here. This is what we call a failure to plan. All right, here we go. Connected the line outputs onto this one, both the XLR and the RCA, and so we'll talk about balanced versus single-ended here on this in a moment, and then we'll also need to talk NAS versus Oz, okay? But the point that I want to make here is that the amplifier in the EF600 quite impressed me. It is not quite as raw, resolving, or natural in timbre as the G111 Mark II is. So a little bit more texturing came through on this one, a little bit more like if you use a different DAC, okay, a little bit more texturing, a little bit more resolution comes out, like room reverbs have a little bit more definition to them. You can tell where they're coming from a little better, so a little bit more holographic spatial presentation and all of that. But this one does not have the power to push the HE6 series, for example, where the EF600 really does. Like, the EF600 has a lot of power in it and a lot of control. And it also, like, is the amplifier in it is quite transparent. Whatever other DAC that I plugged into the analog outputs or inputs of this thing, like either of these or that Matrix Mini i4 that I mentioned, like, this thing, the amplifier in here took on the sonic character of that DAC. Okay, so a very transparent and a very capable, powerful headphone amplifier in here, which I think actually brings the overall performance of this unit up. I think the amplifier really is held back by the DAC in this piece here too. So that was encouraging in its own way as well. All right, so let's come back real quick. Let's make sure that we hit balance versus single-ended performance. You want to use this thing balanced, at least balanced outputs on it. Doesn't really matter if you use the balanced RCA input, or excuse me, the single-ended RCA input on this, still fine. But I think you really want to use either the XLR balanced output if you're going to use the line out, or if you're using the head amp, you also want to use the balanced output there. Because as is the case for so many pieces here in this price range that are made balanced, they sound better from their balanced outputs than they do their single-ended outputs. The difference, and this is becoming a theme, the soundstage size and the spatial coherence both decrease when you go from balanced to single-ended, okay, and you lose some resolution. So room reverbs aren't as clear, ghost notes aren't as clear, and just you'll lose some stuff in there. So you really want to use the balanced outputs on this thing. It's fine to use the single-ended input. You're not going to lose a whole lot if you're going to connect your turntable preamp to this thing. You'll be fine. Okay, so there's that. NOS versus Oz here. So again, non-oversampling mode. What that means is we're going to bypass the onboard digital filter on this and just send the audio stream directly into the R2R DAC module and let it do its thing. Let's quickly unpack a little bit what that means. So most DACs anymore use some sort of upsampling or oversampling. They use an oversampling digital feature. Oversampling digital filter in front of either the DAC chip or the resistor ladder or all of that. That usually does some level of upsampling. And then there's a second filter on the analog side, the output side of either the DAC chip or the resistor ladder, which reconstructs the analog waveform. What the oversampling filter is helping it do is like the job of that reconstruction filter on the backside, the output of the DAC chip or the resistor ladder or the multi-bit chip or whatever, okay, is made easier if it has more samples to work with. So that's why the oversampling / upsampling, okay, over there can be beneficial. So in theory, with up to 24-bit 192 kilohertz files, the oversampling filter should sound better because again, the higher the more samples you can pump into your DAC chip or the resistor ladder, the easier you make the life of the reconstruction filter on the other side. But I don't think the oversampling filter in here is particularly good. I preferred the non-oversampling mode of this. So I think this would be a piece where you would want to really strongly think about getting HQ Player or some other form of software upsampler and then put this in NOS mode, because then that will really light this up in there. Because even with just like regular 44.1 kilohertz, 96 kilohertz, 192 kilohertz files, I think the NOS mode in here just sounded a little bit more natural. It sounded a little more holographic. It's slightly more resolving. And I think the oversampling filter in here also injected a little bit more sibilance and all that I didn't detect in like a sharper, pointier kind of center image, I think, that I did not detect in the NOS mode. So I think HiFiMan has a little bit of work, or whoever makes their R2R DAC for them, has a little bit of work to do with that oversampling filter yet. Okay, I think now we can wrap all of this up. So what's the takeaway on this? I do think that this is a strong unit overall. It does a lot of things pretty well, and it does it at a reasonably priced package. It has an interesting form factor. It has a useful input-output configuration, okay, or menu. I'm not thinking of the right word, but a set of inputs and outputs. It's useful. It improves around the edges of the build quality over the EF600. It has a very capable and very powerful headphone amplifier in it. The DAC gives it a unique, energetic, lively, engaging sound that is not all that resolving, but it still is fairly holographic and just fun to listen to most of the time. Okay, but that DAC, while giving it the unique sound, also is the bottleneck in the unit, and most AIOs have a bottleneck somewhere in them, and for this one, it's the DAC, unfortunately. So who would this be for? I think so if you're tight on desk space, okay, and you need a DAC amp, okay, you have hard to drive planar headphones, boom, okay, look at this, okay, and the way the input-output configuration also works, I really like, because it gives a lot of flexibility. So if you have an analog source like a turntable and you have a phono preamp that you like, you can plug that into here. And then I think a really cool thing about the balanced XLR analog input on this is that the amp in here is really capable, that you have an upgrade path where you can, down the road, grab one of these, save up, get one of the Bifrost 2/64s, or, you know, Denafrips Aries 12th anniversary edition, or what have you, something like that. Plug that into the balanced output of this and access the very capable headphone amp in here, and you are on the upgrade path at that point. You can have a solid amp, you can get a better amp later, but you've got a good solid intermediate step going for you there. So I will leave it there. Pretty good unit. I can recommend it, even with the slightly lower resolution from the DAC than I would like. I still think it has a lot going for it and is worth your consideration at the $800 price point for an all-in-one. So I am Wave Theory. This has been my review of the HiFiMan EF600 DAC amp. Please like this video if you have not already. Leave a comment down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out my PayPal and my Patreon so that you can support me and I can continue to bring you cool content like this. And as always, enjoy the music.